for listening.
Welcome. This is Detailing Addiction. I'm Dr. Susan Blank, and you're listening to America's Web Radio. Thank you so much for being here today, David Donaldson and Michael Daly from the Atlanta Healing Center.
Hello. Thank you for having us. Glad to be here.
This is a topic that I think will hopefully enlighten a lot of our listeners. I know that in doing some of the more in-depth research, it enlightened my ideas and some of my thoughts. One of the topic that came to us, obviously, because it's so much on everyone's mind with the two mass shootings this weekend, 3, and the many questions about what do we do about this, what's causing this, how can we prevent it, what can we do to make things better. I thought this would be a really good time to look at some of the ideas that have been floated by thought leaders in our country about what some of the solutions might be. So today we wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at the role of social media, looking at the role of hate speech, particularly as it involves social media, looking at the effects of violent video games and the tendency towards acting out violently, and also look at the role of mental illness and safety in this country regarding gun violence.
I don't know, did you mention just the fact that we have the internet available in so many places is also a big
right
concern.
Just the availability.
The availability
that we have in previous generations have just not had, even in the last 10 years. So I think before we get too far into this, though, that the important thing to remember is just like trying to approach the disease of addiction, it's a multifactorial problem.
Yes.
It is a multifactorial solution. And what is going to be the solution for one person is not necessarily going to be the same solution for another person or another family. I think all the things we talk about today are going to be part of what the problem is and potentially part of possible interventions for solutions. I think there are probably many other things that we either won't get to or haven't thought of, or hopefully as more time and energy is spent in really looking at some of these problems, that we'll come up with some better solutions. But it's not one problem and it's not going to be one solution.
Right. And when you said that we're looking at the individuals, basically, and what a solution for one individual is not a solution for all. We also have to look at then societies.
Correct.
Because there are different societies where one set of rules is never going to work for them.
Right.
But it might work for another.
And what's been so interesting in this reading is recognizing that the entire world right now is dealing with the effects of social media on its population and on, because there are different sides in every society taking different points of view, and it's having an impact on governments and on societies all over the world, and different governments are dealing with it in different ways, just like families and individuals, but a lot of people throughout the globe are really reckoning with this issue.
And just as social media, and I think maybe that'll be the first place we'll start today, if that's okay with you all, just as social media may be one of the really big points in terms of what is happening with some of the hate speech and the violence, it's also in the past been part of solutions. And in Libya, for example, they have special websites that allow people to understand where it might be safe to travel, what road might be safe, free from violence, free from any kind of terrorism or any kind of military fighting. So there are numerous circumstances where people have used the internet to and the social media to alert that there is a problem, that there are violent things happening in a particular country or in a particular location, and as a way to request help or to let your families know that you're okay, that you survived the tornado or the flood. They're, as with anything, as they say, the poison is in the dose. And we know that there are some medications and some substances that are very, very helpful and have a lot of value. But there are also some medications that, taken too much of, will kill you. It may save your life in one dose, but it may kill you in another. So I want to be sure that we're being balanced in this and that we are not just pointing the evil, because I don't believe that. I think that that it's really important that we look at it from as many angles as we can figure out. But David, I noticed that you had this quote out from Dr. Shermer, who is the guru of eSkeptic, which is one of my favorite websites. And he is a thought leader and a psychologist who does a lot of work. And I thought his statement was really cool. Do you mind sharing it with us?
You know, I would just absolutely love to share it with you, but I have the wrong glasses, so I'm having to stretch my arms just a little bit to see the quote. The quote that really grabbed me, and I'm hoping this is the one you're talking about, is that it's not even coming out either.
I'm sorry. I saw you had that out, and so I called on you. That wasn't very fair.
But,
at all.
just in terms of your initial point, that social media, it's changing our society, but it's one that's being used. We use it every day within our business. We've used it in preparing for the show. We use it to reach out to customers and clients, and they use it, like, if there's a storm, they want to know if Gwinnett County schools are closed. They check our
For
social
sure.
media to know if they're coming to group or not. So it's got a lot of benefits.
I think that a really good quote in talking about this is, you don't have to give people a reason to be violent, because they already have plenty of reasons. All you have to do is take away reasons to restrain themselves.
Thank you. That is the Michael Shermer quote. And again, he is the author of eSkeptic and does lots of social forums and has some very interesting writing on all kinds of issues. But I thought this was very appropriate today. Again, that you don't have to give people a reason to be violent. You just have to take away their reason to restrain themselves.
Exactly. And I thought it was interesting in this article, before he got to that point, he made sure that to say no one joins a cult.
Right.
They join a group. Now that group can then be turned into a cult.
His
but
emphasis,
in emphasizing they are going with their belief.
and they're joining a group that they think's either going to help them
Right.
or help society in some way.
Correct.
Right.
And it turns out to be a cult.
And that many times people act in a way that they truly believe is the right thing to do. And studies looking at Nazi Germany and talking to the guards and the people that perpetrated some of the evils that Hitler had created on the Jewish people, they truly believed that they were doing the right thing and that they were following orders and that they were being good citizens. So I think it is really important that we recognize this fact that people are looking for something to believe in. They're looking for a place to belong. And many people want to be motivated to take some action. So that may be that you go as one of our lovely employees does, and she volunteers every week at homeless shelters for animals, and she takes care of the pets, and she walks them, and she lives what she preaches, and she practices it, and she believes it very strongly, and she donates her time and her money.
Well, she even
her effort.
fosters animals.
She fosters
so
animals.
she brings them right into her home, which is, pretty remarkable.
Right. So I think that most people are motivated in that way to try and do something, as you said, David, that either is going to help them be better, like joining a religious congregation, or that's going to do something to help the community, like working in a homeless shelter or a soup kitchen. So people are looking for identity. People are looking for common beliefs, and unfortunately, the internet and social media has provided some of the splinter groups to be able to really capture a lot of people's hearts, minds, attention, and even radicalize people, and this has been a real problem.
Well, they were talking about ISIS using hashtags, ISIS using videos and spreading them, and they were able to really radicalize a huge group of people. And I think when you brought up the Libya using it for good, then you also can look right over there and see Syria, which used it for very, very bad things.
Right.
So there's always good and there's always bad.
So I think that
And part of it is that with the new social media really being geared in the American way to keep people watching more and to keep getting more advertisements and more likes and more shares to keep that generation going, they're set up. The programming is set up to keep feeding what you're interested in. And so if you're already interested in those people over there that are doing something that seems a little strange, finding out what's going on, it just can feed that bit of anxiety and turn anxiety into paranoia in a really brief period of time. Because it's doing what it's designed to do in terms of keeping
The logarithmic
connected.
Yeah, it figures out what you specifically want and then directs all of those things that maybe you wouldn't have found on your own.
Right, to keep you interested and keep you connected.
Exactly.
So in the trial for the Charleston shooter, the prosecutor reported that this young man who killed 9 black clergy and worshipers in June of 2015 engaged in a, quote, self-learning process. He did this online, and this led him to believe that the goal of white supremacy, required violent action. So this gradually getting more and more engaged and more invested in more radical thinking, being motivated to violence, I think is one of the things we need to really look at. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about violence in our country.
Quick Stakes, that's Q-U-I-K Stakes, are not just for surveyors. They are great for family and community gardens. Go online to www.quickstake.com or contact your local land surveying supply dealer and get you a box of Quick Stakes. You'll love them every year when you plant your garden. Again, that's Quick Stakes, Q-U-I-K Stakes, the truly preferred way to stake and identify what's in your garden now.
Hi, this is Ron Camacho, host of the Business Hour on America's Web Radio. If you'd like to hear an eclectic mix of great programs, from relationships with Dr. Ann Schubert to homegrown veggies, and from classic cars to the Constitution, we've got programs for discerning listeners at www.americaswebradio.com.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
This is Dr. Susan Blank, host of Detailing Addiction and medical director of the Atlanta Healing Center. Please join me on Tuesday afternoons at 4 p.m.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. This is Detailing Addiction. I'm Dr. Susan Blank, and this is America's Web Radio. Today, Michael Daly and David Donaldson from the Atlanta Healing Center are joining me, and we're looking at the role of social media. We're looking at the role of violent video games, and we're looking at the role of mental illness in terms of possible sources of the problem for violent acting out, like the mass shootings that we've experienced here recently in this country. And what are some of the sources of the problem, and what are some of the potential solutions? So right before the break, we were talking about the powerful influence that social media has. Facebook, with the algorithms that help me keep finding the same set of shoes that my husband's trying to not have me buy, that pop up every time I log in to see what my grandchildren are doing.
On whichever media site you look at, it still pops
now
up.
Suddenly those shoes are everywhere. But the idea that in the same way that it tailors the news feed that you see and the advertisers that you see to things that you have liked in the past, pictures that you've spent time watching, videos that you've shared with friends. They know you better than you know yourself, and they know just how to sell your information to advertisers and promoters that might be catering to things that you're interested in. So sometimes I've found some really unique gifts, and I've found some interesting new knitting patterns, and I've found some very funny cat videos, and I can entertain myself for a long time. But by the same token, if people are full of anger, and David, I want you to talk a little bit about the anger management piece of this, because I think it's important, but the anger, the hate, someone has shunned you, or someone has insulted you, or hurt your feelings, or left you out, and they may belong to a certain ethnic group, or a culture, or a race, or a gender, or the fifth grade class that you weren't in because that was the accelerated class and you weren't in the accelerated class. Whatever it was that happened that began to help you formulate these ideas that those people are not good people. Those people are trying to hurt me. Those people are trying to make my life miserable.
Or take away something that you think that you deserve.
Right, or threatening my life, my freedom, whatever it is. You go down this same rabbit hole that I go down with knitting patterns and cat videos. It really becomes a problem. And I know, David, that you've had some experience with anger management groups as part of addiction treatment, and we see that the power of anger and hate.
Well, and not only is there a large correlation between addiction and anger management and anger issues, but they both really impact the exact same part of our brain. Dr. Gary Bird with the Anger Management Institute does trainings related to both addiction and anger, and part of what he talks about with the anger management is the amygdala, our burglar alarm system. And when he's looking at it with anger management, he's talking about an amygdala that's always on guard for being ripped off or put down or attacked in some way, and it's always ready to defend with verbal aggression followed by physical aggression, and it will go do that pattern really quickly. And so a lot of work with anger management is helping people to breathe, take time out, allow for their rational brain to kick in and for their amygdala to calm down. Part of what we recognize in the world of addiction is that our brain is wanting to continually to do whatever it thinks is going to feed its survival because it's getting this reward system, and the addicted brain has their amygdala is on alert for more. So it's that same part of the brain that is getting activated, and I find it pretty interesting when you're looking at some of the information about the social media sites and the different postings that will just be so-and-so said such and such, and it'll be just a real quick little thing that's
a tease
or an attack of one group or another, and it gets you already to begin looking at that.
I think they call that like clickbait or something.
Clickbait, yeah.
Where you click on it just kind of on a whim, and then you go back to what you were doing, except all of a sudden now you've got all these other things coming up that are to do with that one thing that you just had this little kind of like, oh, I just should look at that, and then all of a sudden you see this stuff and you get pulled into it.
Right.
The other part that strikes me with all of this is with addiction, we often talk about the faster in, the higher the addictive potential.
Right.
Related to, if you have one beer versus you have 3 shots, the shots of liquor are getting to that brain much faster, and it has a higher addictive potential. Certain classes of benzos have a higher potential than others because they hit the brain faster. And we've discovered that this medication that might be helpful for focus, if we crush it and we snort it and it gets to our brain faster, we're focused intensely for 5 days.
Right.
And we are fully hooked and addicted. And it's the same thing that's happening with this clickbait. Mm-hmm. You click one picture, you get another picture, and it's another angry scene or another putting down another group of people, or it's another...
Well, it takes over and it becomes this little thing that you were thinking, well, that's kind of not fair or something, and then all of a sudden you start to see all these images that are coming to you that are showing you, oh, that's
really
this
not
is
fair.
Really not fair. Look at this. This is everywhere. In your head, you've already it's a world problem, and it just started with a clickbait.
Right.
I know that's extreme, but that's what happens.
But that's often how it happens.
And the thing is that the Facebook, I'm not saying just Facebook, but the
YouTube.
social medias,
WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter especially.
They're designed to do that, and their advertisers are what's paying the bills. And so it's really hard when countries say, oh, you have to regulate yourself. I mean, that's like putting the fox in charge of the hen house or whatever, because it's very hard to regulate yourself when you have all this money pouring in.
Right. And the idea that some of the language is very subtle. and some of the cyberbullying is very subtle. That one person reading it may not think anything about it, but it strikes a nerve with someone else. And we begin to see if that's something that you're interested in, either because you agree or because you disagree and you want to get more into it. There's some patients that I'm thinking about that will be up all night on Twitter. They just get stuck on it, and they get angrier and angrier, and they're not necessarily reading the stuff they agree with, although some of them are, but they're reading the stuff that they don't agree with. But either way it goes, they feel more angry, they feel more activated, they feel more like taking action, whether that's clicking and buying that pair of shoes, or whether that's donating to a certain campaign, or whether that's funding some sort of
or even
group.
Just commenting and sharing.
Right, and
a
sharing
comment and a share
sending.
keeps the message going.
We see this really becoming a huge problem, and then we get to this very tricky, slippery slope of, is this free speech? And one of the things that, at least here in the United States, we're guaranteed the right for free speech, and when do we draw a line, and when do we have to take some action?
Well, just real quick on what you were saying there, Brown versus the Entertainment Merchants Association.
Right.
That was a First Amendment, fully protects violent speech, even for minors.
Right. So that was
And that was a
case
Supreme Court ruling.
in 2011, I think.
Yes.
Very important, saying we cannot take. We can't screen everything.
Well,
so we have to look at some balance, and I think it's very interesting. In Germany, for example, they're extremely sensitive to the whole Nazi situation and the white supremacy, and they take a very quick and swift action to take down anything that is being posted that would fall into that category, because they see the easiness of which you have some people just exposed to something over and over again, and they become compliant. Like, I have to be careful with language sometimes, because I hear language all day long. I don't even hear it, and then I start to say it. So we become desensitized, and that's the first step. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll look at the other steps at how we need to be careful with our language. Please stay tuned.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
This is Daryl Pullis inviting you to listen to America's Homegrown Veggie Show right here every Saturday morning at 10 Eastern Time. Great guests, great tips, and valuable information about growing your own vegetables, fruits, and herbs.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com. Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. This is Detailing Addiction. I'm Dr. Susan Blank. You're listening to America's Web Radio. Today, David Donaldson and Michael Daly and I are talking about the role of video gaming, social media, and the internet in creating violence and hate crimes. Before we leave this idea of social media, I think it's really important, again, going back and looking at some of the work done reviewing what happened in Germany under Hitler, that first of all, there's misinformation and disinformation. There's highlighting particular parts of the news, and there they use the radio because that was their media.
Well, if they had the internet then, can you imagine?
Because that was the propaganda at the time.
Right.
It
was the propaganda machine at the time. And they gradually got many people involved as just, I don't really care. And I no longer have sympathy for the Jews. I no longer have empathy. I'm sick of hearing about it. I don't really care. I'm just going to ignore it. And that's, of course, the biggest part of the population. And that's one of the biggest problems when we have this group called sympathizers. That's probably too strong a word. They're not necessarily sympathetic. They're more like apatheticizers. But this is usually the largest group. You hear swear words all day long. Next thing you know, you're swearing. You're not noticing it. And then my grandsons are saying, "Grandma, you can't say that word." We get numb to it. We get numb to violence. We get numb to profanity. We get numb to sex. We get numb to a lot of things by constantly being bombarded with it. Then as the person becomes to the next level, that's when they begin to be more radicalized. And this is when they now actively join a group. They're going to pay membership. They're going to buy the magazine. They're going to read the book. They're going to go online and listen to the YouTube. They're going to necessarily take some action, but not going out and marching and picking up signs and protesting and chaining themselves to trees or whatever. But the second group is a fairly large group, and they do provide a lot of momentum. They provide a lot of social funding as well as literal funding for the growth of this hate group. And then we have the activists. These are a much smaller group, but these are very dedicated people who do go out and take action.
That the group just before that, the ones that are actually joining, part of what's so powerful within social media is having more and more followers. And so if they can say,
Right.
we've got 1 million followers, then they get advertising dollars, they get all kinds of other benefits that help the group continue to spread and reach more people.
You had influencers.
Influencers.
that have a lot of followers, that you get them to
Endorse.
whatever it is, and then all of a sudden that influencer has 3 million followers.
Right.
Then that's the way it works. But I was going to say in this case, it was even talking about WhatsApp. It's a text. It's designed so that you can text back and forth on your cell phones or wireless phones, and also have groups. So in India, they were having to shut down WhatsApp during riots because these groups were radicalizing and turning into mobs.
Lynch mobs. I mean, I think that's part of what's important to look at. Worldwide, social media is creating these things. In the U.S., there's all this talk about social media is creating all this gun violence, but in India,
Sri
it's
Lanka,
creating lynching. It's creating violence all over the world. It's just manifesting with the things that are available in that part of the country.
Right.
For sure. Before we leave this particular topic, and we could probably have a whole show on this, I found a really good resource. It actually comes from Canada's Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. It's called Media Smarts, and it talks about the impact of online hate and hate crimes, hate groups, and different ways in which you can disconnect from a lot of the online hate. So that is Media Smarts, and it's from the Canada Centre for Digital and Media Literacy. Centre in Canada, so those of you who do not know, is spelled CENTRE. So I think...
just one more point on this.
Yes.
True confession, I'm one of those people who likes goofy puns. And so I had this little thing pop up on Facebook, a group you might like, which was Goofy Puns, and so I clicked on that, and they were funny, and so I joined that group, looking at all these goofy puns, and so my bigger point with it is that when you're reading along, and people make comments about the puns, all it takes is one person to make a critical comment about something, and there will be a dozen either defensives or attacks that will happen immediately, instantly. So that aspect within the human nature,
defense.
Even on a goofy pun site, that aspect of the human nature to attack and defend is pretty innate. It's already in there. That point that you don't have to radicalize somebody, that they just open the door and it goes, that's really there, even in goofy pun sites.
Exactly. And sometimes it is just that innocently. And then suddenly now you're mad, somebody's insulted you, and on it goes.
And the fact that you have to have the ability to stop yourself from acting on some of that violent thought.
So I think that one of the things I'd like to really talk about has to do with violent video games, because this has come up in the media as one of the solutions or one of the problems. And this has been well studied since 1999 and the Columbine shooting. There has been a lot of research done, not nearly enough, but if you want to look at something very interesting, go to the Resolution on Violent Video Games from the American Psychological Association. They're certainly very concerned about children, particularly any children under the age of 12, spending time with violent video games. The studies have clearly shown over and over again that violent video games do tend to produce in people who play them, whether they're boys or girls, although that still needs to be more studied, but it seems to affect both genders, that the individuals who spend time playing these games are much more likely to have aggressive behavior.
Right.
And much more likely to have a loss of empathy, and more likely to tolerate violence in others.
Right.
The thing that has not been proven.
Just real quick, I think it's important to talk about the percentage of children using or watching and using handheld media, computerized media, television is 90%.
Right.
And it goes to 97% when you add adolescents in there.
Right. So there's a lot of kids doing this.
There's a lot.
A lot of kids using this, a lot of kids spending a lot of time on it. The idea, though, that watching violent video games is then going to result in people acting out violent crimes has not been supported.
Right.
And they have tried.
Every which way.
They have looked at this every which way, and there is just no compelling evidence that it does result in people acting out violent crimes. It does show aggressive behavior, which is not a good thing.
Right.
Lack of empathy, not a good thing. And these are certainly not traits that we want to instill in our young children. But the studies do not bear out that violent video games are related to mass shootings or violent crimes. And so I think that's one of the things we need to look at. Are there problems with violent video games?
Absolutely.
Yes. Is it making us more tolerant to violence? Is it making us less compassionate and sensitive? Absolutely. But one of the interesting studies that was done is looking at how much money per capita is spent on playing violent video games. And while the U.S. is right up there, there are two countries that far exceed the amount of money spent per capita on playing violent video games, and these are South Korea and Japan. Mm-hmm. But when we put that on a graph comparing money spent on violent video games, and U.S. comes in number 3, but we are way far and above the people who are the groups that actually have violent crimes, mass shootings, murders. So it's not the time and the money spent on these video games that is resulting in the acting out of the violence. It really appears to be other factors.
Society.
And the society and probably access to guns. So this is something that we need to be looking at and to be really careful about, because not one solution.
No.
Taking away people's guns makes everybody frightened, everybody mad, everybody polarized. Having some smart interventions would make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And one of the things to look at would be how can we make things safer, and how can we reduce the violent acting out. But it does not seem to be a correlation with time and money spent on violent video games.
Right.
There are other problems with them. I'm not a fan personally, but that is not what we see correlated with the actual acting out of violence. Now, I can tell you, having had my children watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, we know that that they all decided to get up and do karate on each other,
or tie each other up,
or tie each other up.
You know.
So they do tend to act out some of the things that they see, and there is a problem with getting accustomed to violence and death, but it is not necessarily, unfortunately, the solution for us in terms of this particular problem. When we come back after this next break, we're going to talk about the role of mental illness and gun violence, so please stay tuned.
Perhaps you are struggling to cope with the disease of addiction. If not, you probably know a family member or friend that needs help in battling the cravings and the personal and professional damage done by the effects of drugs or alcohol. Get a pen and paper and be ready to write down the following. These are the issues that the trained staff at the Atlanta Healing Center address and treat every day. Their doctors and counselors with over 40 years of practice in the field of addiction can treat the suffering individual in a thoughtful, compassionate, and experienced manner and guide him or her along the path to recovery. So call 770-696-9862 and speak to a knowledgeable staff member about how you or your loved one can be helped to enjoy a better and healthier life. More information is also available on the website at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
This is Ron Camacho, host of the Business Hour, on Fridays from 10 to 11 a.m. Join me as I talk with passionate professionals on a program that profiles the best businesses, business professionals, business practices, and fascinating individuals to get an insider view of how America works. 10 to 11 a.m. on America's Web Radio.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions. Call 770-696-9862 and speak to a representative of the Atlanta Healing Center. They can tailor a program specifically designed to address the needs of the person suffering with an addiction, or give you guidance as to where that help may be found. Information is the key, and the trained staff at AHC is here to assist. If you wish, you can also get more information on the website located at www.atlantahealingcenter.com.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
Welcome back. This is Detailing Addiction. I'm Dr. Susan Blank, and you're listening to America's Web Radio. You probably would have loved to have listened to our interaction during our break. We have some pretty lively conversations because we are a group of people and we don't always have the same ideas, and that's the beauty of communication. But the last thing that I wanted to talk about in this show today about the role of social media, violent video games, mental illness. I really wanted to talk about that in terms of many times we're seeing people come out and make statements. They've got to be sick. They're mentally ill. They're deranged. They're crazy. These people are crazy. And the reality is that is not true. 19 out of the last 20 mass murderers had no mental illness diagnosis. 4 out of 5 mass shooters in general have no mental illness, and even those that did, half of those had not shown any signs or any symptoms of the illness in the recent past. So the idea that simply doing medical and mental illness background checks is also going to solve the problem. It's not, with the huge caveat, is first of all, people who are mentally ill are much more likely to actually be victims of violent crimes. But the biggest way in which medical background checks might make some sense is the fact that 2/3 of suicide deaths, so 2/3 of individual deaths by gun are suicides. and many of these people do have mental illness. So the violence that we are more likely to see related to mental illness is actually self-harm.
Self-inflicted.
And self-inflicted violence. There's the suicidal, and then there's just the stupid, and then there's the I don't know how to clean my gun properly. But for the most part, we see a lot of people who are depressed, who are mentally ill, who have the disease of addiction, who get to a scary place, and they are more likely to take their life.
I don't know this, so I'm asking. Mental illness and behavioral problems are two separate things.
Correct.
So a lot of people, I think that there's a huge amount of general population that thinks behavioral problems equate to mental illness, which is totally untrue.
Right. And as the FBI says, that declaring that all active shooters must be mentally ill is very misleading and unhelpful.
Yeah, that's...
To be a racist, to be a xenophobe, to be someone who is angry does not make them mentally ill.
No,
you can have
absolutely
any
not.
belief that you want. You can belong to any religious group or community group. You can have any belief, and that's part of what our country is founded on. You can believe whatever you want to do.
Absolutely.
And believe in that. How you act on those beliefs do have some consequences, but they do not necessarily always equate with a mental illness. And we have to be very careful with the language that we use, because yes, while that seems like a crazy, insane thing to do, to go and just start randomly shooting in a Walmart or in a restaurant, it is not by far likely that that person actually does have a mental illness. It's out of the range of possibility to think that we're going to go get in our car and drive someplace and shoot somebody. That just does not fit with most human beings, most people that we know. That wouldn't be their goal at the end of the day. So it seems so far-fetched that we can't understand it, and so we use things like insane and crazy and mentally ill. But the reality is that is not true. They're rarely mentally ill. Where background checks that do check mental health status might be helpful are for those that really do relate to people who have depression, who may have had a previous suicide attempt. That is, there is nothing more devastating than to I was called in one time to do a consultation on someone who had attempted suicide by shotgun and did not kill himself, but did blow the front of his face off and had significant problems after that. And it's really devastating when you think about that. So the gun violence, I think self-inflicted is where we might see some benefit from that.
How do you respond? Because lately you hear a lot about suicide by police. Especially for young males, so you'll hear these angry males, and they've gone out and they've done some crime and gotten shot by a police, and people will say, well, he was committing suicide by police. How do you respond to that in terms of your background?
Well, again, I think that we've heard many people, because we ask them regularly, are you having thoughts of hurting yourself?
Or others.
Or others, yes. We ask that every day, too.
Yes.
One of the things that they'll answer was, I could never do that. It's against my religion. I've got my children.
Yeah,
blah,
their
blah, blah.
beliefs stop them from
I'm too scared
doing that.
to do that. I'm too scared to do that. And sometimes people are too scared to actually do it, but they want to do it, and they know if they
act out in a certain way that it will be done for them.
Right. So I think that... and to your point, a question was just asked, what are they? These are people that are filled with hate and confusion that are taking these actions. And Do they have a mental illness? Likely not. Have they been isolated? Have they been radicalized? Have they been fed a constant diet from social media of hate and revulsion and racism and all kinds of angry thoughts? Many of the kids, if they're young people, you hear their cohorts in school say, oh, they were really a loner, they were very isolated, they seemed kind of weird, they didn't have friends. And so we have to look at that piece of it. When we come to think about everything, including the disease of addiction, prevention is the place that we need to go. And today the AMA made a statement. Common steps must be advanced by policymakers in addition to addressing the pathology of hatred that too often find themselves becoming mass murderers. So the idea of we've got to stop the hatred, we've got to find a way to cross that line between when are we having free speech and when are we having bullying, when are we having radicalization of people into taking action against a group of people. That's a problem. When do we have our rights to have our guns versus our right to protect ourselves? When do we take care of people who are mentally ill? There are so many things that come into play here. The right to play video games versus the responsibility of parents to make sure what their kids are watching and seeing, the sites that they're going on. It is very hard to be a parent. And it is very hard, even when you try your best, to be a good parent and to know what's going on. But it is very important, and more than ever, we need to be aware of the time that our children are spending with media, the sites that they're going to, the games that they're being involved with. So even though that may not make them a mass murderer, it certainly may make them someone who is oblivious to that or now immune to the effect of that, or make them more aggressive towards other children at school. We need to take some steps to make sure that they are not going to these sites. We need to have more positive speech and more positive emphasis on groups to join and places to be included. And when we see something that doesn't look right, we need to say something. When we see the kid that's getting bullied at school, when we hear our children come home and talk about this weird kid, what we need to see, what is it that we can do to help people feel included and to stop the hate language, to stop the bullying, to stop the racism, to stop fighting genders, and to try and find a way to not create
differences.
Differences and hate.
In particular, to begin using language that inspires empathy and inspires connection and social relationships.
Because freedom is what we value and what we need to protect. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week on Detailing Addiction.
You're listening to America's Web Radio on the AmericasBroadcastNetwork.com. Thank you for listening.
The disease of addiction is a life-altering challenge, not just for the person suffering its effects, but also for the family and friends who support and love the one caught in its grasp. What should be the course of treatment? Who is the best person to render treatment? And what is the best place to go for the care that is needed? We know that you want answers to these and many more questions.